I didn't mean to look. Honestly, I didn't. But that morning, when I stepped outside to water the plants, I caught a glimpse through her open kitchen window, and nothing about my day was ever going to be the same again. My 50-year-old neighbor, Claire, stood by the counter, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, sunlight tracing the curve of her neck while she hummed softly to herself. She wasn't doing anything special, just standing there, holding a mug, looking out at the garden like she owned the morning. And then she turned. She met my eyes straight on. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't pretend she hadn't noticed me staring like an idiot from across the fence. She just smiled, calm, knowing, and said, "If you want to look, just ask." I swear I forgot how to breathe. I stood there holding my watering can like a prop in a play I hadn't rehearsed, water dripping onto my shoes, brain completely empty. By the time I found something resembling composure, she had already turned back to her mug and gone about her morning like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just said the most quietly confident thing I had ever heard in my 38 years of living. My name is Ethan. I moved to Maplewood almost 2 years ago, right after my divorce was finalized. I picked the street for no good reason other than it was quiet and the rent was decent and it was far enough from my old life that I could pretend, at least for a little while, that I was starting fresh. I wasn't looking for connection. I wasn't looking for anything, honestly. I was still in that numb phase that follows the end of a long relationship, where you go through the motions of being a person but nothing really lands. You eat, you sleep, you mow the lawn. You wave at neighbors you don't know. You stop expecting your days to mean anything. Claire lived next door. People on the street mentioned her in passing the way you mention something permanent, like a landmark. She had lived there for years. A widow. Kept to herself but was always kind. Had a garden that somehow looked better than everyone else's without her ever seeming to try too hard. I had noticed her before that morning, of course. It was hard not to. She had a kind of presence that didn't demand attention but collected it anyway. The way she moved through her yard, unhurried and sure of herself, like someone who had already made peace with the parts of life that usually make people anxious. We had spoken a handful of times before that morning. Short conversations over the fence. Whether, mostly, the new family at the end of the block. Whether the hardware store on 5th was still open on Sundays. Nothing that meant anything. And yet every time, I walked away feeling like the air was slightly clearer than before. A week after the window moment, she caught me in a battle with my front gate. The latch had rusted through and the whole thing was leaning at an angle that made it look more like public art than a functioning gate. I was crouched down with a wrench, pretending I had any idea what I was doing, when I heard her voice from across the yard. "You're doing that wrong." I looked up. She was standing near her rose bushes with a mug of tea, watching me with that same calm expression she always wore. Not mean about it, just honest. "Then come teach me," I said. She laughed. It was a low, warm sound that moved through the air like something physical. She set her mug on her porch railing, walked over, and held out her hand for the wrench. I gave it to her without argument. She crouched down, assessed the situation in about 4 seconds, and started working with the kind of quiet confidence that makes you feel both grateful and slightly embarrassed. I watched her hands move, steady, precise, unhurried. And then, for just a moment, when she passed the wrench back to me, her fingers brushed mine. It was half a second, maybe less. But something in my chest shifted, small and certain, like a door opening somewhere I hadn't known was closed. We started having tea together after that. It wasn't planned. It just became a thing that happened. Some evenings I would bring 2 mugs out to the low fence between our yards and she would already be there, or she would appear a few minutes later, and we would lean against our respective sides and talk until the light went gold and then pink and then gray. She talked about her garden with the same kind of easy knowledge she applied to everything, and slowly, over several evenings, she began to talk about her late husband too. Not with bitterness. With a kind of careful honesty that felt like watching someone handle something precious and fragile, not trying to protect it from you, but making sure you understood its weight before they handed it over. I told her about my marriage, how it had started well and then slowly, almost politely, fallen apart. How love had curdled into routine and routine into silence and silence into separate bedrooms and separate lives until one morning we both just admitted what had been true for a long time. She listened the way almost no one ever actually listens, without preparing her response while I was still talking, without steering the conversation toward herself, without offering the kind of reassurance that sounds kind but lands hollow. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she touched the back of my hand, light as a leaf, and said, "You didn't fail, Ethan. You just loved the wrong person for too long." Something in my chest cracked open a little. Not painfully, more like a window being pushed up on the first warm day of spring. I started sleeping better after those evenings. I started looking forward to mornings in a way I hadn't in years. And I told myself it was just friendship, just the natural comfort of being around someone steady and real. I told myself that so many times it almost started to sound convincing. One evening I brought coffee instead of tea. She raised an eyebrow when she saw the mug. "Trying to change things?" she asked. "Maybe I just wanted an excuse to stay longer," I said. She looked at me for a moment, something quiet and careful moving behind her eyes. "You don't need an excuse," she said. I walked home that night thinking about her voice. The way it stayed the same whether she was joking or serious. Steady, like something you could anchor to. And I sat on my couch in my quiet house and thought about how strange it was that 2 years ago I had moved here to feel nothing. And somehow, without trying, without planning, without even noticing it was happening, I had ended up feeling everything. I just didn't know yet how complicated everything was about to get. I was at the neighborhood block sale on a Saturday morning, just a few days after that coffee evening, when I first understood that other people had been watching us. Claire and I had set up adjacent tables without really coordinating it. It just happened that way. She had arranged a collection of old records, a few books, and a ceramic teapot she said was ready for a new story. I had a box of tools I never used and some furniture I had no room for. We worked quietly beside each other, easy and comfortable, the way you are around someone when you stop performing and just exist. That was when Frank Harper wandered over. Frank was the kind of man who filled silence with opinions nobody had asked for. He was in his late 60s, retired, and spent a considerable portion of his day observing the neighborhood from his front porch with the dedication of someone who believed the whole street was a television show made for his entertainment. He picked up one of Claire's old records, turned it over, set it down, and then looked from her to me and back again with a slow, satisfied expression. "Didn't know you liked them young," he said to Claire, as if I wasn't standing 2 feet away. "Careful now. People will talk." The air shifted immediately. Claire's smile stayed on her face, but something behind her eyes went very still. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck, that particular heat that comes not from embarrassment but from controlled anger, the kind you press down because you know making a scene will only give a man like Frank exactly what he came for. I kept my voice even and said, "We're neighbors and friends." Frank smiled like that was the funniest thing he'd heard all week, said, "Sure, friendly neighbors," and sauntered off with his hands in his pockets. Claire kept her hands moving over the table, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "He talks because he's lonely. He thinks noise is the same thing as company." She picked up the teapot and held it out to me. "Take this. It needs a new story." I took it, and we didn't say anything else about Frank for the rest of the morning. But later, when the sale had wound down and the street had gone quiet again, Claire sat on my porch with her hands wrapped around a glass of lemonade and stared out at the yard. The confidence I was used to seeing in her posture had gone somewhere. She looked smaller, not in a weak way, just in a tired way, like someone who had been holding something up for a long time and had finally set it down. "I thought I was ready for that kind of comment," she said. "Turns out I'm not." "You don't owe anyone an explanation," I told her. She nodded slowly, jaw tight, and then she said something that caught me completely off guard. "Come inside, Ethan. I want to tell you something I've never told anyone out here." We sat at my kitchen table with the teapot between us. She ran her thumb along its rim like she was reading something written there. And then she started talking. After her husband Robert passed, she said, she had gone through his things. And in a box in the back of the closet she found receipts and printed messages she was never supposed to see. They went back years. Not one mistake, not a moment of weakness, but years. Everyone in Maplewood had called her devoted. A saint, one woman actually said, for standing by him through the illness. She had accepted every kind word with a straight back and steady eyes and had said thank you and meant it, because in one version of the story she was a devoted wife and that version was true. But in the other version she was a woman grieving two men at the same time. The one she had loved and the one she had apparently never fully known. I didn't say anything. I didn't try to fill the space with reassurance or comparisons or things that were meant to sound comforting but mostly just redirected the pain back at the person feeling it. I just sat there. And after a moment, she reached across the table and slid her fingers over mine. "I don't tell people that part," she said. "They prefer the clean version." "I'm not people," I said. The corner of her mouth moved. "I know." There was a knock at the door then. Linda from across the street, returning a dish she had borrowed weeks ago. She looked at Claire, then at me, then at our hands on the table. She softened visibly, said something polite, and left. When the door closed again, the room felt like it had exhaled. Claire straightened slightly. "Let's make a rule," she said. "The neighborhood keeps its stories. We keep ours honest." "What's ours?" I asked. She looked at me with those steady eyes. "Right now, two people at a table who are done pretending." I squeezed her hand. "Mine is simpler than that. I like mornings because you're in them." Color moved into her cheeks, slow and real. "Then mine is this," she said quietly. "I am not afraid of my age, Ethan. I am afraid of being treated like something that needs to be explained or justified or apologized for." "You are not an explanation," I said. "You are someone I want to know." She looked at me for a long moment like she was deciding whether to believe it. Then she stood, said she should get home before dark, and I walked her to the door. She paused on the step, turned back, and pressed a brief, soft kiss to my cheek. Not romantic exactly, but not nothing either. Something in between, something that felt like the beginning of a question neither of us had fully asked yet. I stood at the open door and watched her cross the yard. The sky was going gray at the edges. A low rumble moved somewhere in the distance, far off but getting closer. I thought about what she had said about keeping our story honest, about not needing to explain ourselves to anyone watching from the outside. And for the first time since I moved to Maplewood, I felt like I was standing on ground that was actually solid. I didn't know then that within hours, everything I thought I understood about where this was headed would be tested in a way I hadn't prepared for. She kissed my cheek and walked back across the yard, and I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself that for about 3 hours. Then the storm hit, and I stopped lying to myself entirely. Came in fast, the way serious storms do, not with a slow build but with a sudden shift in the air, like the sky had made a decision. The wind picked up in minutes. Rain followed hard behind it. I was sitting on my couch reading when the first crack of thunder rattled my windows so hard a picture frame dropped off the wall. I picked it up, set it on the shelf, and stood there listening to the rain hammer the roof. It was the kind of night that made the whole world feel smaller, like everything outside your four walls had gone underwater. I was about to make tea when the lights went out. Not a flicker, just gone. Complete and immediate darkness. I stood still for a second, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. I found my flashlight in the kitchen drawer, clicked it on, and swept it around the room. Through the window I could see Claire's house. Dark too, except for one small, warm glow moving behind the glass. Candle. And then her shadow crossed the window, and a moment later I heard a knock at my front door. I opened it and she was standing on my step in bare feet, a blanket pulled around her shoulders, her auburn hair wet and curling against her face. She looked startled by her own presence at my door, like she had walked over on instinct and only just now thought to wonder if it was a good idea. "My power's out," she said. "I can't find the fuse box. I know it's late. Come on," I said. I grabbed my flashlight and a jacket and we crossed the yard together through the rain, shoulders hunched, moving fast. By the time we got to her porch we were both soaked. Inside, her house was warm in a way mine wasn't. 3 candles on the kitchen counter. A blanket draped over the couch. A half-finished cup of tea on the table that had gone cold. It smelled like cinnamon and something floral I couldn't name. I swept the flashlight toward the basement door. "Fuse box down there?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I never go down there at night. The bulb burned out last month and I kept forgetting to replace it." "I've got the light," I said. "Stay here." The basement stairs were narrow and the air down there was cool and damp. I found the breaker panel on the far wall, ran the beam across it, and spotted the tripped switch immediately. I flipped it. Above me, the house hummed back to life. Light spilled down the stairwell and I climbed back up to find Claire standing in her kitchen with both hands wrapped around a fresh mug, watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "You just saved me from a very long and very dark night," she said. "Wasn't much," I said. "Just a breaker." I wasn't only talking about the lights. I looked at her. She looked back. Neither of us moved for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Then she poured me a mug without asking and set it on the table, and we both sat down. Rain pressed against the windows in waves. Lightning flashed outside and she flinched slightly, just barely, a small tightening around her eyes. Without thinking, I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. "I used to love storms," she said after a while. Her voice was quiet, almost careful. "Until the night Robert died. He was driving home in weather like this. The car went off the road about 4 miles from here." She paused. "They said he didn't suffer. I've never known whether to believe that or not." "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be," she said. "I'm telling you because I want to, not because I need comfort. I've had enough of the comfort that people offer when they don't know what else to do. I just want to say things out loud sometimes without someone immediately trying to fix them." "Then I'll just listen," I said. She looked at me like that was the right answer, like she had asked the question before and I was the first one to get it. We sat like that for a long time. The storm moved through slowly. She talked about Robert, not the man she had grieved at the funeral, but the complicated version, the real one, the man who made her laugh and also kept whole pieces of himself hidden behind closed doors. I understood now, hearing her talk about him in this fuller way, why finding those receipts and messages had cut so deep. She had already been carrying the grief of losing him. Discovering she had never fully known him was a second wound entirely. She talked about the years after his death, the way grief didn't arrive in one clean wave but kept coming back in different shapes at unexpected times. The way she had eventually made a kind of peace with it, not by forgetting or forgiving everything, but by accepting that love and disappointment can exist inside the same person at the same time, and that doesn't make the love less real. I told her about the last year of my marriage. Not the arguments, but the silence between them. How my ex-wife and I had stopped being unkind and started being invisible to each other, which was somehow worse. How the day we finally said the words out loud was almost a relief after years of not saying them. "You know what I think?" she said. "Tell me." "I think some relationships don't end because people stop caring. They end because both people are exhausted from caring in the wrong direction for too long." I thought about that. "Yeah," I said slowly. "That's exactly what it was." She nodded like she already knew. Another crack of thunder rolled through, closer this time. She lifted her eyes to the ceiling for a second, then back down to me. And then she did something I wasn't prepared for. She reached across the small space between us and touched my face. Just the tips of her fingers, barely there, against my cheek. Like she was checking something. Like she was making sure I was real. "If you want to look," she said softly, "just ask." My heart stopped for a full second. It was the same thing she had said that first morning through the kitchen window, but it meant something entirely different now. Now it wasn't about being caught staring. Now it was an open door. A real one. "I'm already looking," I said. "I've been looking for a while." She leaned forward slowly, like she was giving herself time to change her mind and choosing not to. Our foreheads touched first. Then, gently, carefully, her lips met mine. It was not a movie kiss. It was not dramatic or urgent. It was soft and unhurried, and it lasted only a few seconds, and when we pulled back, the silence between us felt entirely different from any silence I had known in years. Not empty, full. She rested her head against my shoulder. I stayed where I was. The rain began to ease outside, the hard edges of the storm softening into something quieter and steadier. Neither of us spoke for a long time. There was nothing that needed to be said. When I finally stood to leave, she looked up at me with tired eyes and a small, real smile. "Thank you," she said, "for staying." I walked back across the yard in the light rain, and I felt something I had not felt in so long I had almost forgotten it had a name. Hope. Quiet, fragile, specific hope. The kind that attaches itself to one particular person and refuses to be general. I went to sleep that night thinking about the way her fingers had felt against my face. I woke up the next morning thinking about it too. And then I looked out the window and saw a silver car parked in her driveway that had not been there the night before. The car was still there an hour later. I told myself it was none of my business. I made coffee. I checked my phone. I looked out the window again. Still there. A silver car, clean and expensive looking, parked at an angle that suggested the driver had arrived in a hurry or with enough confidence not to care about being neat. I didn't recognize it, but something about it sat wrong with me in a way I couldn't shake. The way a sound in a quiet house makes you stop moving even before you know what you heard. I was carrying my second cup of coffee to the porch when Claire's front door opened. A man stepped out first. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, well-dressed in the careful way that people are when they want you to notice without looking like they're trying. He stood on her porch with his hands in his pockets, relaxed, surveying the street like he had done it many times before. Claire came out behind him. She had her arms crossed loosely over her chest, not angry exactly, but guarded. The kind of body language that belongs to a conversation that has been happening for a while and hasn't gone anywhere good. He saw me before she did. His eyes moved from my porch to my face with a slow, assessing calm that I recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who has decided in advance that you are not a threat but wants you to know they've considered it. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't involve the eyes. Claire turned and saw me. Something crossed her face, complicated and fast, and she lifted a hand in a small, uncertain wave. I walked over because standing on my porch staring was worse than whatever came next. "Ethan," she said when I reached the edge of the yard. Her voice was steady but careful. "This is Greg. He's an old friend." Greg extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was the kind that holds a half-second too long. "The neighbor," he said pleasantly. "Claire's mentioned you." "Has she?" I said. It wasn't a question. "The helpful type," he said. "Good to have those around." He glanced at Claire with an expression that was almost fond but had something proprietary underneath it, like a man looking at something he still considered his even after setting it down. "I was just passing through. Thought I'd check in. Saw her lights on late last night." That last part landed differently than he probably intended. He had been watching her house. He had seen the lights on during the storm and shown up at her door the next morning as if that was a normal thing to do. Claire's jaw tightened in a way only I would have noticed. "Greg was leaving," she said. Greg smiled again, unhurried. "I'll call you later," he said to her. Then to me, "Good to meet you, neighbor." He got in the silver car, backed out with the same careless confidence he'd arrived with, and drove away. We stood in the yard. A bird called somewhere in the oak tree by the fence. The street was completely ordinary around us. "I'm sorry about that," Claire said quietly. "Who is he?" I asked. I kept my voice even, but I don't think I fooled her. She looked down for a moment, then back up. "After Robert died, Greg was one of the people who helped me get through it. We got close. Too close, maybe, for a while. It ended, but Greg has a way of not fully accepting endings. Something settled in my stomach like a cold stone. Does he know what kind of person he's being?" I asked. "He thinks he's being caring," she said tiredly. "That's what makes it complicated." I looked at her. She looked like someone trying hard to hold two things at once and running out of hands. And I realized then that whatever had happened between us the night before whatever that quiet, gentle, honest thing was that had grown slowly over weeks on porches and at kitchen tables in the middle of storms, it was now standing in the middle of something messier and older and harder than either of us had accounted for. "I need some time," she said, "to deal with this the right way. Not to avoid it, just to do it properly. He needs to hear something clear from me, and I haven't said it clearly enough." "Okay," I said. "I don't want you to think last night was nothing," she said quickly. "It wasn't." "I know it wasn't," I said. She nodded, and then she went inside. The days that followed were the hardest kind of waiting, the kind where you're not sure what you're waiting for or whether it's going to go the way you need it to. I kept busy, fixed the rest of the fence, repainted the porch steps. My friend Tom came over one evening and told me over 2 beers that I was in over my head and should pull back before I got hurt. I listened to everything he said, and I knew he meant it kindly, and I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. But I also knew Claire, and I had seen the way she looked the night of the storm. Not like someone confused about her feelings, but like someone who had been careful for so long that being unguarded felt almost dangerous. She wasn't pulling away from me. She was tying up something old so she could move forward without anything left unfinished behind her. On a Thursday afternoon, about 10 days after Greg's visit, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it and Claire was standing on my step. Not distressed, not apologetic. Steady. The way she always was when she had made a decision she felt good about. "I talked to Greg," she said. "Really talked to him. It's done. Not because of you before you say anything. Because it should have been done a long time ago, and I kept letting it drift because confrontation is uncomfortable and I was confusing history with obligation." I stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," I said. She came in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had told me about the receipts in the closet, where we had made the rule about keeping our story honest. And we talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, about what we both wanted and what scared us and what we were willing to try. When she finally stood to leave, the evening light was coming through the window at that low golden angle that makes everything look significant. She stopped at the door and turned around. "I'm not afraid of this," she said. "I just needed it to be real. Not a storm, not a moment. Something I chose on a regular afternoon with a clear head." "It's real," I said. She smiled. That small, knowing smile that had started everything. The one from the kitchen window on an ordinary morning that turned out to be nothing like ordinary. She stepped forward, and this time when she kissed me it wasn't tentative or careful or shaped by uncertainty. It was clear. It was chosen. It was both of us, finally, deciding at the same moment that the walls had served their purpose and it was time to stop hiding behind them. We stood in the doorway as the evening folded quietly around Maplewood. No Sander. No drama. Just the sound of the neighborhood settling into night and 2 people who had found each other slowly, honestly, and without any pretending left between them. She took my hand. I held it, and the porch light between our 2 houses glowed steady and warm against the dark, the way it would from that night forward, the way some things do when they finally find their place and decide to stay.